Thanks for having me here, and thanks for joining me here. So this is, anybody home, McFly is some phrase from the film, from the movie, Back to the Future. And when the ILIAS conference was announced, I just thought of this movie and thought, what can you do with accessibility and tell about accessibility, about the time we look back now for 30 years of World Wide Web content. In the beginning with static content mainly, or just static content. Today we have the new World Wide Web is the one with interactive content and content management systems and learning management systems like ILIAS. And I want to compare what happened in the early days in the 90s and compare that to what we see today with problems we have with accessibility in the content management systems and in the user interfaces we have, because they are quite similar. Although the technique has changed, it's more or less mostly the same problems we have today with accessibility. So this is my agenda, what I want to talk about and what I want to tell you about. I'll tell you a bit about who am I, but because I don't have much time left, I go quickly to that, and then I say a bit about this Back to the Future, what was my intention for this presentation. Then I tell you a bit about diversity and accessibility. Thankfully, Kendra just did quite a good job just a couple of minutes ago, so I can skip a bit of that part, which is good. And then I show you some World Wide Web things, stuff I created myself in the 90s. It's a bit embarrassing, but I think you will find it okay to see that. Okay. And at the end, how we try as a community in ILIAS to make ILIAS better and more accessible in the future. So this is a bit about me. I skip this part, most of that. It's just that I work for the University of Applied Sciences and Arts in Dortmund, in Germany. And I'm responsible for the part of digital accessibility in studies and teaching. I work in this area for about 25 years now, not at the university now in Dortmund, but in other universities in Germany. And in this university, I'm for about 2.5 years now. And I mainly have services for students to just make things more accessible for them. And I have to do a bit in the community of ILIAS, because we use ILIAS as a learning management system at our university. So yes, this is some part of the movie Back to the Future, and this was a part I thought about instantly when I saw what ILIAS conference was about this year. So you see on the left side this time traveling Marty McFly, time traveling young man. He went back 30 years in time and met his father on the right side, and he's bullied by Biff Tannen, who wants George to do some things he doesn't want to do. And although Biff Tannen in the middle, the one who's knocking on the head and says, "Anybody home, McFly? Think, what are you doing or what are you not doing?" Although Biff Tannen is a bad guy in this movie, I sometimes have the feeling that I am the bad guy when I tell people, the developers or maintainers, what they did wrong or what has to be improved in ILIAS. So I sometimes think I'm the man in the middle and knocking on people's head, although I'm not really a bad guy, I think. Alexandra? Okay, all right. Okay. So, and hopefully the man from the future is just wondering what all this is about, because in 30 years, nobody believes that there was any accessibility problem back then, hopefully. So what or how do I start? I start by telling you a bit about diversity, how I see it. So diversity, we have always, at the moment, the focus on people, diversity of people is a very, very important thing. But I always see diversity of technology, diversity of situations we are in, So I'm just one person. I'm not a group of different people, but I use different technologies. So I use a laptop, I use a desktop computer, I use a smartphone, I use, like many of our students, ebook readers. And all this hardware and operating systems, they all interact with the World Wide Web. And it doesn't matter which technology I use, it must work. So I know many students who would use an ebook reader with a black and white screen for their studies if only the graphics were not only in colors, but in other graphical formats that can be seen or recognized in black and white. I have the same problem like Kendra. I need some. So we have these different technologies, and we have different situations. Like when you sit in a train. So that's what I show here. These are the situations. Just go back once. Okay. So there are these situations when you sit in a train, you watch a video and it is loud and you don't have your earphones with you. It's quite good to have subtitles in the video when you watch a screencast or something like that. So although you aren't deaf, it's good to have subtitles in some situations. So the diversity of all these things, technology, situations, and people, of course, they are the reason why we need to be accessible, not only for disabilities, but for technologies as well. So now I switch to the digital accessibility, which is almost the same. It's the same graphics, although the people are exchanged by the senses, view, listening, and touching. So what we need is that our information and technologies are perceivable, operable, usable, and robust. That's the POUR principle that Kendra already mentioned. So this is what we need to do. We need to check if everything that we produce is follows this concept of the POUR principle. For ILIAS, it means we need to look at two different things. We make ILIAS more accessible, and we need to make the content that is put into ILIAS more accessible. So the developers are responsible for the learning management systems. And the users who use it, teachers, lecturers, web editors, and so on, they are responsible for the content management system content or the learning management system content. So that's the both things we have to look at. So when I show you some things now from the 90s and later in times from now, I use some technical phrases like hypertext markup language, cascading style sheets, JavaScript I leave out for this presentation, and user agents. That's important that you know a bit about that. I think most of you have heard of all these things, but it's important that I don't lose anybody who doesn't know what that means. So hypertext markup language, HTML, is a description of a web page in background, a technical description. Cascading style sheets is the way or the description how the things look, how the content looks in the website. And user agents for the World Wide Web is just the browsers. And looking at the beginning of the World Wide Web, which started in 1991, it was Tim Berners-Lee from the CERN in Switzerland who invented the World Wide Web and who produced the first website. And he said something very special, or he wrote something very special on his first website, that the World Wide Web is a wide area hypermedia information retrieval initiative aiming to give universal access to a large universe of documents. So it's hypermedia information and it's universal access for everybody. And this is nicely said because it's right from the beginning, there was this idea of universal access for everybody. But what we did when we used the World Wide Web and we produced information, we didn't look at the universal access. We just produced barriers and made our content not accessible. So when a couple of years later, 3, 4, 5 years later, everybody saw that the content wasn't accessible enough, there was a group launched that was the Web Accessibility Initiative in 1997. And there, again, it was said by Tim Berners-Lee that the power of the web is in its universality, accessed by everyone, regardless of disability, is an essential aspect, and access by everyone is precisely the same what he said in principle a couple of years ago. So this is the first web page he produced at that time. And of course, this was accessible because it's very easy. It's just text, it's hyperlinks, and everybody could use it. Even blind people could. The technology was already there in the 90s to use computers with braille equipment and screen readers. So what designers did when they discovered the new playground, they just produced web pages in a way they did with printed flyers, and that didn't work very well. So there was some really big problem because the dynamic content or dynamic visuality we have with different screen sizes and other stuff that didn't work with the way they produced the websites. So I wasn't a designer at that time. I was a computer scientist, had a degree in computer science, and I just saw this playground, and this is my first web page. It was not really nice, but for that time it was okay, I guess. So this is what I produced. It's okay. Yeah, it's not that bad, but I did many things wrong. It's not accessible, and although this page is from 1999, and I worked in that area of accessibility for about 25 years, I already was in that area working, but not in web. So I didn't do anything with websites, just privately. And so I did many mistakes and didn't produce accessible websites at that time. So, and there are things like worst viewed below 800 by 600 pixels. So when the screen was too small, you didn't see much of it. And I used some other techniques that are not really good. So the contrast is bad. I used frames for dividing all this stuff, which I have. So in another slide that you can see here. So what I did is I had two different web pages presented in one page or in one browser window, and this is not a good thing to do. So here, some of the mistakes I made. So I used frames which are not used today anymore. There are inline frames that are not so bad, but the frames I used are not in use anymore in the World Wide Web. But I used a bad background. We still have this today in the web. I used bad contrasts. I used text decorations that are not really good. I used, for example, underlined text, which is a problem because underlined text is reserved for hyperlinks. So you shouldn't underline text which is not a hyperlink. And I had pictures in it, like the baby pictures of me. They lack the alternative texts. So this is exactly the same that we have today in other problematic websites, which are dynamic today. So in the late 90s, problems were identified. What is the problem? Why are designers so bad in doing things? And amateurs, like I was in web design, they did everything wrong. But designers did as well. So the professionals, they made many mistakes in that. I have a web page, I show you this one as well, made by a professional. And when I got better with doing things, I just changed the design for that so that it was better. So I was better in doing things. I wasn't a professional web designer, but I was somebody who knew how to do things better. So I took a given design and made it technically better. So that's what I show you in a minute. So was a new invention in the mid-90s or in the second half of the 90s. That was the idea of the cascading style sheets, where all the design elements were taken off the content. So it was divided. The content of the websites were divided in the real content and in how the content had to look. So, and this is what the websites should be. No, this is another one. Oh, I didn't want to show you this one. This is another old thing. So this was a professional company's website from I don't know what it is called in English, Krankenpflege. nursing service, I think it is. And this was just a copy of what the flyer was, the printed flyer, and that was made by a professional designer. And he used, the professional designer used a technique that is not good for doing things in the World Wide Web. He used tables which were made for table data, like address lists or something. But it was very common in the end of the 90s and further along to use this table design for websites as well. So this made things not so good for accessibility reasons, because the tables didn't work very good with keyboard control and with screen reader output. I can't show you really because I don't have the time to start screen reading things. So perhaps at the end, if there's a bit more time for that, I could try to make a screen reader output for that. What I did with this is changing this to this one. Okay, so the design had changed a bit, but the rest, well, the main things is the same, but the technique behind that is really, really totally different. And what I show you now is the background, the HTML behind that, but it is quite tiny, so that you can see all the background of the first page. And most of it is just designing things. Where should the content be? What color does it have? And what I highlighted, this blue area, is the main content. That's the text that was seen in the web page. And when the design was changed, the source code looked like this. So it was a tidy code. It was better accessible. It was better to maintain. And the same things happen today, not with tables, but with other techniques we have in content management systems or learning management systems, that we have a code that is very, very big, and there are things done in a way that should be done better. So this is just an example from the early years, but we have similar problems with very big code that we have in modern systems, and that take their time to be rendered by the browser. So what I showed here is the style sheets. The idea was from 1993, 2 years after the World Wide Web was initiated, and in 1996 there was the first recommendation for that. But this page was from, I think it was 2004, so the designers didn't use the new technique that was there for a couple of years and was really better to maintain and better to work with, but they just decided not to do it because they did it all the time in another way. So it took very long time to switch the way of designing things. So was the design problem solved? No, it wasn't. Designers still used HTML-based design instead of CSS-based design. And the tools they used, I know from that time it was Microsoft Front Page, for example, and it was Macromedia. Dreamweaver was the second big product. They always used this HTML-based design and didn't use the CSS-based design tools. So the designers didn't have the chance to switch when they used this software to produce things. So it was a bit of a problem that they didn't use the new technologies. So, okay, yeah, that was 2004, the table layout, and I switched to it in 2011 when the company asked me to make it differently and make it better to use. So this is what I did many years later. So when you see things, you don't recognize if it's good or if it's bad that it's made. It's different with other things where you can see instantly that something is wrong, like in this case. So you have a car that has a door, like every car has, but the door is not the right thing at this place. So there you have a wooden door and you wouldn't buy this car. But this is the same that happens with bad designed or bad implemented websites. You pay for things or you get things that are done the wrong way, and you don't really recognize it because you're not an expert. So it needs expert to do this or to recognize this in content management or learning management systems. So, and these are two examples how you compare comparable examples from the car world. And for me, it's the same that we have in websites when things are done not the correct way. So let's have a look at the time. I don't want to exceed everything here. So, yeah, it's okay. The problems we have today, when we look at accessibility issues, it's still the same. I've pointed out still. So it's still that we have diversity of technologies, situations, and people, and that are not thought of. I think this is the essential thing, that we all need to think and live in terms of diversity. The large variety of people, the large variety of technology we have, not only the Edge browser, the Firefox browser, what do we have? Google Chrome and Apple Safari, the big four, perhaps for the smartphones a couple more. But we need to think that there are many other things, many other user agents around there and situations people are in. And people with many different background that we need to address. And when we think and live that, and we know, we have a large variety of things, then many of the problems we have wouldn't really occur. This is one of the main problems I think we have in designing or producing things in IT. What we have today, the same like 25 or 30 years ago, is that some third-party innovations are preferred over standardized recommendations. So we have recommendations how the web should function. And there are some other techniques that are invented and are added to the browsers, to the communities that build the web. And designers tend to the fact that they use these new things because they are so crazy, they can do so much new stuff with it, that they drop what the standard is. But the standard is something that is solid ground for producers of web browsers, which are not only Firefox or Edge or Google Chrome, but you can access, your car can access the internet, or the fridge can access the internet. So all these different IT products rely on a given standard. And when you go away from the standard, when you produce things, you just lose many people. And the third thing is HTML is not used the correct way. I didn't do it in the 90s, and today some things are still different used. It's just like the car with a wooden door. Okay, what's new for almost 2 decades now is that the Web 2.0, Web 2.0 is, I don't really know what the English phrase is for that, but I think it's called the same. So that the web content is produced by many other people. So we just give a content management system or in ILIAS a learning management system. And many people produce content for that, and they all need to be able to produce accessible content. This is a big task to do. So we try to introduce accessibility for everybody, not just the developers, the maintainers, but also to the users of the learning management systems. A couple of examples from today. So I have one example from ILIAS. And I have a couple of examples from other systems because I didn't want to show you this is bad and I don't know who is responsible for that. So I show you just a couple of things from the web today. This is from the Wikipedia, and I just started a web page from the 58th Academy Awards from 1986, where Back to the Future got an Oscar. And at the end of every Academy Awards page, there's a table. And this table is used for just visual purpose, because this is not a real table anymore. We have a row at the beginning or 2 rows at the beginning, which have just 1 column. Then we have rows with 2 columns. We have rows with 3 columns. And this is just not a straightforward table. So you shouldn't use tables in this way. And you see this in the Wikipedia on many places, because all the people that produce content for the Wikipedia, they don't know what accessibility means, and they just do things wrong. So This is even worse because there are tables within tables within tables, and you shouldn't do that because when you use a screen reader, blind people, and you get said what is in which column and in which row you are, you get very confused because you don't know where you jump from one line to. This is very common, even in learning management systems. This is an example for an accessibility problem we had in ILIAS, but we don't have anymore because the developers did a very good job to fix this. You might know that ILIAS 6, we had a different user interface, a new sort of user interface. And the main menu was placed on the left side with tiles, and I have the repository tile here. On the left side, it's ILIAS 6. On the right side, it's ILIAS 7. And what happened when the new version was produced, we used the wrong elements for producing the menu. So this should be lists, but this was some sort of div element, and this is a wrong thing to do. So this is a bit like the wrong seat in the car or the wrong door in the car. It works, but it wasn't perfect. So we had a test by a company, and they said, well, you did all this wrong, you have to fix it. And now in ILIAS 7, we have the correct element for that. This is HTML, and it's a listing element, and listing elements should be used for menus. So this is what we did inside the community. I'm part of the special interest group accessibility. We had a close look at all these problems we had in ILIAS 6, and we fixed it, or not we fixed it, but we suggested how to fix it, and the developers did a quite good job to make ILIAS much better than it was in the version 6. And this is a great thing we recognized with all the developers who were working on these problems. So they did a really good job to fix this. Another thing, this is an example from Moodle this time. So I didn't want to show you equal things in ILIAS, but this is something that happens quite often in the modern web. Sometimes you can't avoid it in complex systems like learning management systems or content management systems. But I think, well, I know in sometimes you can. It's just like the thing, you have large code, but you do just a little tiny thing. And this is what happens here. So we have some sort of div element, which is just a container, which is used for grouping things. So you have a container, which starts here and ends here at this time. And the next container is inside it. There's nothing in the first container than the second. In the second is nothing else in the third. In the third is nothing else in the fourth. And then there are the grouped elements for a headline, some text, and a hyperlink. So what the system does is having something like a cardboard box, and just one box inside another. And when you get a parcel like that, you have to open each cardboard box to get to the real content. And this is what the browsers do when they get to this sort of code. They have to render or have to look, what is all this div about, this cardboard box? Because here's a couple of things behind that, and that says how the cardboard box has to be presented. So the browser has to look in everything of that. So, and they all interfere with each other. And that is a possible problem. It mustn't be a problem, but it makes code much more complex. And it is better to try to avoid these things. But I know, are there maintainers or developers here somehow? I know that's not always possible because different developers produce different parts of the learning management system, and each one produces perhaps one div only, and the next developer, for his special case, produces another div, and the one div lies in the div of the different developer. So this happens. It's not available on every spot, but we should look at things like that if it is possible to reduce code to make it easier to maintain. So this is a bit parallel to what I had with this designer web page with tables, and I changed it to CSS design. So large code with little purpose. So I just switch quickly to things. I already said a bit about that, about standards. There's a standard, a recommendation how the web should work. There are more inventions, innovatives, that are used by developers, but not really implemented in all the user agents. And just much later, the new standard is up, and then all the user agents get their updates. But designers tend to use the innovations before they become a standard. So we should watch closely if we have standards or if we don't use them. So this is a conflict we produce. And what I had is best viewed with 800 by 600 pixels back in the 90s. Today we have tested with Google Chrome, Firefox, Edge, and Safari also. So this is a thing that can produce problems. So very quickly, a bit about the special interest group, accessibility. This looks a bit complex, but it isn't. It's just when we encounter a problem with accessibility, we report it in the bug checking software in Mantis, and sometimes we get a report for many issues which are in ILIAS, and report all the issues in Mantis. And the maintainers, the developers, they get an information about the problems, and then we try to discuss a solution and fix that. And we are in a continually process to improve ILIAS. And we use the same methods then with the normal bug fixing. So we go into Mantis and produce new reports of bugs at that space. So if you're interested in joining the group, the special interest group accessibility, you can just have a look at the Doku ILIAS.de and try to contact us there to help. So, and what we do with user content, that's the last slide, I think. Now, almost. So we try to produce knowledge collections for producing content accessible content. So this is what happens on many different spaces at the time. I know from other universities who were working on that. This is a screenshot from our university. Just a week ago, we launched this working space in ILIAS, how to produce accessible text documents, accessible videos, how to do accessible video conferences and all this stuff. And we're doing the same within the ILIAS community, special interest group, and with Alexandra and some other people. Openly, we try to, we are doing this with open educational resources license, so everybody can use it. So we try to spread all the knowledge for producing content accessible. And this is just a comparison from the 1990s to the 1920s from side of web development. So I had all these both sides. The content management system on this side, that's what we have, and content we produce on the other side. This is the overview for the content management systems which the developers should maintain. So very important. Today, ILIAS maintainers are more aware of accessibility than I was in 1997. So this is a really good thing because everybody wants to produce an accessible ILIAS. And I didn't want to do that 30 years back. So this is something I learned at the beginning. And the ILIAS community and the developers are much further. They are much more into this topic. So, and the web technology is more complex than before. Okay. If we don't make it in 30 years' time, I'm still knocking on other people's heads. And this right thing is from one of the later movies, the same persons, but 30 years more of age. So I don't want to do this. So just help us to make ILIAS more accessible. Thank you.
Thank you, Wolfgang. still have a bit of time. We have a few minutes for some questions.
Sorry, I will do it in German. Wie sind bisher so die Erfahrungswerte? Wir haben ja vorhin gesehen, man versucht den Code zu bereinigen, zu verschlanken, nochmal anzupacken, um gegebenenfalls Schwierigkeiten auszuloten. Wie ist die Erfahrung hinsichtlich Bereitschaft der Maintainer? Wollen die das auch machen oder müsst ihr da Überzeugungsarbeit leisten?
Also ich bin jetzt etwas über 2 Jahre dabei. Oh, English? I don't know. I switched to German, if that's okay with the translation. Thanks. Ich bin jetzt 2,5 Jahre dabei und ich war sehr überrascht, wie weit das Thema schon fortgeschritten war im Bereich der ILIAS-Community. Also die Developer, mit denen ich so zu tun habe oder mit denen ich auch in direktem Kontakt bin, die sind sehr offen für die Sachen, die sind sehr bereit, eben solche Dinge auch anzufassen. Es ist manchmal ein bisschen schwierig, weil es sind, ich sag mal vergleichsweise, es wenig Ressourcen da, das ILIAS insgesamt zu maintainen und dann auch noch bestimmte Barrierefreiheitsproblematiken noch zusätzlich anzugehen. Deswegen fallen die manchmal ein bisschen rüber. Aber wir gucken immer, dass wir so ein ausgewogenes Verhältnis haben. Wenn was wirklich dringend ist, dann wird sich da auch drum gekümmert und dann wird eben noch geguckt, brauchen wir Funding dafür. Das wird dann eben irgendwie organisiert. Aber mein Eindruck ist, dass da eine sehr große Bereitschaft ist, das zu tun. Zumindest eben mit den Leuten, mit denen ich sehr eng auch den Kontakt dann habe. Auch über die SIG haben wir ganz gezielt eben mit Leuten zu tun. Also das Technical Board zum Beispiel, ich habe das jetzt in einer Folie drin gehabt, aber ich habe es, glaube ich, nicht gesagt. Das hat auch eine Empfehlung von uns aus der SIG übernommen, dass eben die Barrierefreiheit in den Entwicklungsprozess, in den jährlichen einfließt. Der jährliche, der jetzt schon ein bisschen überfällig ist, ne? Wir wissen es für die aktuelle Fassung, aber bitte? Okay. Genau, aber dass da eben die Barrierefreiheit auch Berücksichtigung findet. Und es gibt eben, wenn man im GitHub guckt, da auch ein Paper für, so worauf müssen Developer achten, wenn sie ihren Content oder ihre Programmierung machen. Ich glaube, das tun bestimmte unten in der Kette vielleicht nicht so ganz gut, weil sie auch noch nicht das Knowledge haben, aber im Großen und Ganzen war ich sehr überrascht, wie weit die ILIAS-Community war, als ich dazu gestoßen bin. Also ich bin da sehr zuversichtlich. Die sind alle sehr bemüht, dass das gut wird. Und wir hatten es auch in der 6er zu 7er, ist das, wenn wir mal so einen Test haben laufen lassen durch ein Unternehmen, da hat sich vieles wahnsinnig verbessert. Jetzt im Moment, wir hatten gerade einen Test auf die Alpha, da sind die Probleme wieder unglaublich groß geworden, aber das sind sie, weil sowieso die Alpha eben sehr fehlerbehaftet ist. Ich glaube, da löst sich einfach vieles auch von alleine erstmal auf. Wir gucken mal, wenn die Beta raus ist, machen wir den nächsten Test, oder die ist jetzt raus, wir machen jetzt den nächsten Test. Und dann wird, sobald eben auch die endgültige Fassung da ist, ziehen wir auch nochmal einen Test nach, hoffentlich. Ich glaube, irgendjemand wollte ihn fanden. Und dann gucken wir, was draus wird. November. Genau, im November. Also das ist, es funktioniert wirklich gut, finde ich. Ja.
Ja, vielen Dank. Ich habe das nicht immer ganz verfolgt, was ihr so in der SIG macht. Ich finde es aber total gut, dass ihr es macht. Habt ihr euch mit dem Thema schon mal befasst, technisch die Autoren und Autorinnen noch mehr zu unterstützen, es richtig zu machen? Also wir haben bei uns im Moment läuft Relaunch der Webseite ein Projekt, da haben wir Funktionen eingebaut. Wenn du keine H2 gesetzt hast, dann kannst du keine H3 setzen. Als nächstes, also dass man tatsächlich den Editor anfängt so aufzubohren, dass man weniger Fehler macht durch Unwissenheit.
Ja, das Problem, genau. Ich habe es, glaube ich, irgendwo auch aufstehen gehabt. Ich bin jetzt so ein bisschen schnell durchgerauscht, weil die Zeit auch knapper wurde. Das gehört eigentlich dazu, dass das Content- oder Learning-Management-System uns dabei unterstützt, dass wir keine Fehler im Sinne der Barrierefreiheit machen. Und beim ILIAS ist, glaube ich, es ist eine Menge Arbeit zu tun, was den Seiteneditor angeht. Der hat noch sehr, sehr viele Barrierefreiheitsprobleme und ich glaube, es gibt auch viele, die sagen, so selbst wenn ich jetzt keine Beeinträchtigung habe, komme ich damit ein bisschen schlecht zurecht. So, es ist ein bisschen umständlich, bestimmte Dinge zu tun und also da wird man nochmal dran müssen. Und dann sind solche Sachen natürlich, dass man wirklich eine Überschrift 3 erst dann setzen kann, wenn oben drüber eine Überschrift 2 ist. Die wären dann essentiell, weil sie unterstützen die Leute dabei, dass sie Sachen nicht falsch machen. Aber ich habe jetzt gerade, Alexandra, weißt du es, ich habe da jetzt keinen genauen Blick darauf, ob da in dem Sinne was in Planung ist.
Wir sind gerade, was den Editor angeht, in so mehreren Schleifen. Das heißt, als du angefangen hast, in dem ersten Jahr, wo du gekommen bist, waren wir beim Fix und haben gesagt, immer, wenn ein Medienobjekt hochgeladen wird in ILIAS, soll zwangsweise ein Alttext mitgeliefert werden. Wir waren im Showfix und alle haben uns aus dem Zimmer gelacht und gesagt, im Leben nicht, nein, ihr seid doch bekloppt. So, das war der Stand. Dann haben wir festgestellt, okay, der Vorschlag, den wir gemacht haben, war nicht gut genug. Es ist völlig inakzeptabel für den Rest der Community, wir müssen eigentlich einen besseren Vorschlag machen. Dann haben wir den gemacht und haben gesagt, okay, wir könnten das so und so machen, auch mit dem leeren Alttext. Wir haben das heute Morgen bei Enrico gesehen, was der da für Klimmzüge machen muss, deswegen. Und ich glaube auch, dass es für Neuen da einen Schritt nach vorne geben kann. Und solche Wege, die sind einfach relativ lang, weil wir alle in dieser ganzen Kette diese Lernkurven haben. Jeder einzelne von uns braucht diese Entscheidung und dann auch immer wieder diese Frage von Vermittelbarkeit. Und das ist total, ich muss sagen, den Sozialismus in seinem Lauf hält weder Ochs noch Esel auf. Wir werden das machen. Aber es könnte dauern.
Ja,
Und wir müssen natürlich auch Prioritäten setzen. Ne?
Ja,
Also
das
das ist
stimmt,
dann,
ja.
ne?
Und wenn man es dann versucht hat, kann es immer noch sein, dass die Leute nicht mitziehen, weil man zwingt sie, einen Alternativtext einzugeben und der lautet dann oft Bild. Also der erklärt nicht, was das Bild zeigt. Sowas gibt es ja dann auch. Ne? Also da muss die KI noch besser werden.
Okay, dann danke ich dir vielmals, Wolfgang.
Ich danke auch.
Und
Ich habe sehr geschwitzt hier oben.
wir werden sicher noch öfters über das Thema sprechen. Ich finde ja das Gute, dass diese Awareness jetzt da ist. Also dass man jetzt halt einfach den Entwicklern das viel bewusster ist,
Ja.
was man da macht, weil das ist ja auch nicht, was wir vorhin gesehen haben, war ja noch relativ neu, das Beispiel aus ILIAS 6. Ist ja nicht aus Böswilligkeit getan,
Überhaupt
sondern,
nicht.
oder aus Ignoranz. Es war halt einfach.
Und Diff
dran
ist
gedacht.
der,
Es
Diff
war
ist
halt
der
einfach
Allrounder,
nicht-
ne? Also
Ja,
Diff ist der
genau.
Allrounder. Also ne, wenn ich irgendwas tue, dann nehme ich ein Diff-Element
Genau,
und
also
mache
da-
damit irgendwas. Und es gibt aber eben Elemente in HTML, die einen bestimmten Zweck haben und die muss man eigentlich immer nehmen und das muss man einfach nochmal wieder zurückbringen in die Community. Und das muss man eigentlich also in anderen Systemen auch machen, weil das ist nicht ein ILIAS-Problem, es ist ein Problem, was in dem gesamten Web vorherrscht, weil alle arbeiten auf die gleiche Art und Weise. Ja, man muss den so ein bisschen zurückbringen, dass sie wirklich so in die Basics nochmal gucken müssen. Self-HTML nochmal aufrufen, ne? Was ja viele dann sagen so, das ist doch nur für die Anfänger. Nee, also da steht eine ganze Menge Zeug drin, was wirklich Hand und Fuß hat. So, okay. Genau. Vielen Dank.
Gut.